So today, I just want to think about what I'm calling ruins in reverse. And these are buildings that don't fall into ruin after they're completed, but actually they get abandoned whilst they're being built. So we have these kind of very strange structures that invite a kind of very different idea of ruination. And I'm doing it through the lens of this particular concentration of these ruins in reverse in a city in Sicily called Giare, which has been called the archaeological park of Sicilian incompletion. So the construction of any building is always dependent on the successful coming together of the right design, materials, and labour. Also depends on time and the availability of all different kinds of resources. Now, indeed, such are the uncertainties during a building's construction that it's always vulnerable to possible abandonment before it's even finished. And many thousands of buildings across Europe were left incomplete, and many still are after the 2007 financial crisis. More generally, though, architecture in capitalist contexts is fundamentally bound up with abandonment and obsolescence because of capitalism's incessant need to expand and create new markets. So it forces obsolescence on both labour and, more specifically, buildings themselves. So today, the average lifespan of buildings is very short, much shorter than the lifespan of the materials themselves. So most steel-framed structures will only last around 30 years, compared to 40 years for a reinforced concrete building, and significantly longer perhaps for brick and stone. So even a relatively short period of stasis during a building's construction can have a significant impact on its future, whether shortening its lifespan still further, or if it's a very long period of abandonment, making that building uninhabitable. Now, in the town of Giare, on the southeast coast of Sicily, architectural incompletion has become manifest in a disproportionately large number of half-finished, often very grand public buildings. These have been documented by the Italian artists collective Alterazioni Video, and also the geographer Pablo Arboleda. Giare's home to no less than 25 incomplete public buildings, initiated between the mid-1950s and the early 2000s. Many of these buildings are notable for their scale. So here's a vast athletics and polo stadium designed to seat 20,000 people, or a near Olympic-sized swimming pool nearby that was never completed, and a 5-story cultural centre termed a multifunctional hall as well. Just 3 examples. Now, these are dominated by prefabricated concrete frames and breeze block infills, slowly being overtaken by the local flora, meadow grass, cacti, as well as coated in fine layers of solidified black ash from nearby Mount Etna, which is Europe's most active volcano. The rationale behind some of these projects is quite difficult to believe. So a vast polo stadium in a country where only a few people have any interest in the sport, or an Olympic swimming pool that was built a metre too short. One would have thought these things were fairly obvious. But actually, what's interesting is that as a whole, these incomplete buildings speak of the absurdities that result when political ideology is directly wedded to the construction industry. So Italy had a significant period of boom economic years, from around 1975 to 1995, when private companies succeeded in dominating municipal governments, where the measure of a politician's success was his or her ability to bring big building projects to their hometowns. The money, employment, and prestige that followed became ends in themselves. The buildings, deliberately left unfinished, so that the contractors could keep funds flowing into the local economy. And this phenomenon extends right across Sicily, and to a lesser extent the whole of Italy in this map, produced by Alterazione Video. 400 or so unfinished projects across Italy, and 160, that tight concentration of black dots at the bottom there, 160 in Sicily alone. In 2008, some of these incomplete public buildings were reclassified by Alterazione Video as what they called the Archaeological Park of Sicilian Incompletion. And this was in consultation with the town's municipal authorities to give these unfinished architectures a new cultural identity as a kind of recent version of heritage. And this process culminated in a community-based festival held in Giare in the summer of 2010. So tours were offered of the town's new ruins, and playful reappropriations of their spaces took place. A polo game and a chariot race in the athletic stadium, and a mock swim in the town's empty pool. The festival concluded with a ceremonial cutting down of one of the concrete pillars and its removal to Venice as an exhibit in the 2010 Architecture Biennale. In the summer of 2015, I visited Giare and used the tourist map produced by Alterazione Video to guide myself around Giare's new ruins. So my visit took in the vast concrete walls, buttresses, and cantilevered stairwells of the athletics and polo stadium shown here, and it was begun in 1985, this building. The more diminutive, but no less extravagant, children's play structure in the Chico Mendes Park, begun in 1975. The swimming pool itself from 1985 in nearby Tripunto, with its cavernous concrete interior being slowly invaded by hardy creepers. And the multifunctional hall started in 1987 with its skeletal 5-story concrete frame and open-air amphitheatre slowly being overtaken by grass. And you can see here quite clearly the volcanic ash that's been deposited from Etna, which is shrouded in cloud in the background. Now, throughout my tour of Giare's unfinished structures, I felt very aware of just how difficult it is to categorize these structures as ruins. So on the one hand, here's me sitting on the terrace of the swimming pool. The swimming pool and the multifunctional have many of the qualities of conventional ruins, this kind of sense of silence, emptiness that leads to quiet contemplation. Also signs of reclamation by nature, vegetation overtaking. I think these probably were the changing areas of the swimming pool. And also pleasing aesthetics of decay, stained concrete, just one example. But on the other hand, parts of the athletics and polo stadium are actually used by the local population. You can see here a new running and cycling track that circles these gargantuan empty concrete stands. While the crumbling concrete structure in the Chico Mendes Park sits right next to a busy children's playground and cafe. Indeed, many of these ruins seem to merge with the rest of the town. Once paid attention to, this kind of abandonment suddenly reveals itself to be everywhere. I'll come back to this at the end, particularly in these half-finished structures that litter Giare and the surrounding towns, these unfinished extensions to apartments and houses. Now, this kind of realization that incompleteness is everywhere and actually melded with lived spaces themselves challenges our ideas about what ruin actually is in the built environment, and also quite uncomfortable questions about time, particularly about the futures of structures that seem to serve no function. And these questions have really informed the work that Alterazione Video have done in transforming perceptions and uses of these unfinished buildings in Giare, particularly in their 2010 festival. So this is this kind of manifesto. It's called the Sicilian Incompletion Manifesto that they published in 2008. And they outline the rationale behind their engagement with what they call Giare's ruins of modernity. What they do is challenge the image, the common image that incomplete buildings signify failure. It instead embraces them as what they call open to the imagination of the people, because of their very openness in terms of what they actually will be used for. The original function is now redundant, if you like. What they do is also try and link appreciation of these ruins with a much longer tradition of ruin appreciation in Italy that goes right back to the antique period, where these kinds of ruins are all around Italy and are readily valued as heritage today. Now, this may seem on the surface like an attempt to romanticize the ruins, to bring them into this tradition that's solely about kind of pleasure and positive value. But there's also a really strong political element in this manifesto. What they call, so they're trying to make these ruins into what they call landmarks to the laissez-faire creative enthusiasm of Italy's post-war boom years. So the idea of creating monuments out of new ruins is actually here also to draw attention to the way in which buildings are embedded in a capitalist system that is constantly about creating obsolescence. In claiming back these sites as places for the imagination, they offer a way of re-inhabiting these ruins in a really radically different way, of turning them back into lived spaces rather than the dead spaces that they are apparently at the moment. We've also seen after this ideas to kind of complete these buildings. So this is a proposal for the swimming pool to actually turn it into a kind of ecological park. This sort of luxuriant growth in a pond setting rather than actually as a functional swimming bath. Now, during my stay in Sicily, as I've said before, I was really struck by the sheer proliferation of unfinished buildings in and around Giare and all over, really, Sicily as a whole. These included not only entire buildings under construction where work seemed to have stopped or just proceeding very, very slowly, but also countless incomplete additions to existing properties. A three-story incomplete addition here, I think, is in the centre of Giare. These have a very interesting kind of and very distinctive style, I think, in the built environment. These exposed breeze blocks projecting concrete reinforcement bars, and also these black rectangular holes which are awaiting windows or doors that may never arrive. In a sense, they disturb our kind of generally smooth, linear ideas of how time works. So they're about futures that aren't ever going to arrive. They're futures that have been suspended, cut off, if you like. And in a sense, what they also show, particularly in this setting of the Southern Mediterranean, is that incompleteness in the built environment isn't the exception. It's rather the rule here. And in a really remarkably direct way, I think, just to conclude, these unfinished buildings suggest a kind of radically uncertain relationship in terms of time between past, present, and future. That's both discomforting but also potentially liberating, I think, as well. They openly accept and display the uncertainty of building and represent, I think, the condition that actually is found in most cities, if often hidden. That is this constant churning of creation and destruction.